Hi, everybody. It's Tom Double Carl, and welcome to Politics in Perspective. This was quite a historic week on the trade front. President Trump got his first trade deal, but probably more importantly, of course, the Catholic Church has a new pope. We're going to cover both of those items. We want to thank Patriot.tv for carrying the show. ANU AUN TV as well, YouTube, Rumble, and of course, you can get all of these on my website, politicalvanguard.com. As I said, today's segments will relate to the Pope with our special guest, Thomas McKenna. In the third segment, I'll cover the trade deal that Trump negotiated and why it matters. But first, we're going to start off in our first segment with a bit of politics and what I call the Democrat oligarchs. I'm sure you saw this week that Bernie Sanders made it onto Fox News with Brett Baer. And Bernie Sanders tried to tell you why, well, he shouldn't have to give up his private planes. You don't see him at Washington National or the president, he said. So, what is really going on here? Is that a legit argument for the Democrats? Well, let's put it all in perspective, politics in perspective, and the Democrat oligarchs. Of course, Bernie and AOC are out there claiming that oligarchs run the country. Bernie says both parties, AOC says Republicans. We all know that in the last election cycle, about twice as many billionaires were out there like George Soros and others helping the Democrats. They, twice as many as the Republicans, the billionaires were helping the Democrats get elected. If you look at this website that I'm going to bring up here to talk about this, what you have there, this is the CLC, which is a website you might want to go to, and it talks about dark money pumping into the 2024 elections. This is from October. So, what's dark money? Well, the law has created such a rubric of how you get money into campaigns. You have one organization with a name that you don't have to disclose who it is. And then your money goes there. That organization gives it to another organization, and then it winds up in some campaign coffers or fueling a campaign. So let's look at some of the examples of the Democrats. Now, to be clear, there's dark money on both sides, but it's not the Republicans that are out there saying that billionaires are helping the Democrats alone. Meanwhile, Bernie's with the oligarch tour. So let's bring up some of the examples that this website shows. And here they are. We find that 7 million was given to oppose RFK through dark money. This group called Securing America Greatness contributed $15 million. 7 million of it went to opposing RFK. Well, who do you think did that? That, of course, was a Democrat thing. Meanwhile, the website says 400 million went through Future Forward PAC, giving 200, and they received the Democrat ticket received 205 million from the dark money group. I don't know, 205 million seems like a lot of money to me, pretty oligarchic. And both of those groups are dark money groups. Let's go to the next example from this same web page. You can look it up. Majority Forward, another Democrat aligned group, spent millions of dollars against the Republican in the Senate primary. All right. And then, of course, Bill Gates, in addition to Soros, quietly donated 50 million to an arm of Future Forward, another dark money group. And what did he do with that money? Of course, he helped Kamala Harris. So each time the Democrats come along and tell you that either they're against dark money or they're against, quote, oligarchs, we know that they're, I don't know, outright lying to you, because what they're doing is telling their base that's the situation, and the base is buying it because they don't see those reports on MSNBC or CNN. At least they don't know enough about them. So while Bernie the Baron, I'm going to call him, Bernie has what, 3 homes, made millions of dollars selling books. That's how do you buy three homes. When you make millions of dollars selling books, what are you doing? You're being a capitalist. He writes a book, he gets a book deal, he makes a lot of money. Wouldn't you like to do that? That's the definition of capitalism. So it's Bernie, it's for Bernie the Baron, all this is good stuff because he can make money off it. And then of course he winds up out there on Fox News. So let's take a gander at his Fox News interview where he justifies his private plane extravaganzas.
Alyssa Slotkin, senator from Michigan, she said you shouldn't be using oligarch. It's over people's head. You've gotten criticized from other people. Free Beacon says Bernie Sanders spent $221,000 on private jets fighting the oligarchy tour, paid for by friends of Bernie Sanders. That you've spent millions of dollars in campaign funds on private jet travel over the years. How do you push back on both of those things?
When's the last time you saw Donald Trump during a campaign mode at National Airport?
No. It doesn't. But he's also not fighting the oligarchy.
No. You run a campaign and you do 3 or 4 or 5 rallies in a week.
Okay, you do 3 or 4 rallies in a week. I have to get on a plane. The question is who's giving him all that money? He's using dark money, friends of Bernie. So there you have it. You've probably in your lifetime seen those memes where it shows the socialist living high off the land, the government official, and everybody else living poorly. Actually, that's most of history. The person who owns the land, the king, the feudal lord, and everybody else worked for them. Bernie decries poverty in America today, forgetting that history is an example of the elite owning things and the rest, the vast majority of the rest, not owning very much. So Bernie is clearly an elite. How many of you have 3 homes? Would you describe owning 3 homes as elite? Of course you would. Would you describe flying a private jet as elite to your particular stops? Of course you would, but Bernie doesn't. So this is just the latest example, but a very important example to demonstrate that even the self-proclaimed socialist in the Democrat Party, yeah, he's registered independent, but he hangs out with the Democrats. Even the self-proclaimed socialist who says taxes should be raised on everyone, who says money should be redistributed, who says we should have government health care, even he thinks he's exempt from the life that he otherwise would live because he's doing the right thing. He's going to these events to advocate for his socialist position. Therefore, he should be able to live a life of being an elite. By the way, you also get to the whole argument of what? The Green New Deal. Here's a guy who claims, of course, that we should all do green energy. Why? Well, his argument is that we're polluting too much and that's warming the globe and that's really bad. So why is he on a private jet? So the hypocrisy just goes on and on. Why is this so important? Why do I care about Bernie Sanders? Well, quite honestly, who's out there right now for the Democrat Party? Who's doing things nationally? He wound up on Fox News. Why is he there? Because he and AOC are the show right now. Literally. They are the show. You find Chuck Schumer down at 21%. Hakeem Jeffries is one of the worst speakers, minority leaders ever. He's inarticulate, to say the least. So who's out there right now? AOC, purportedly worth millions, and Bernie Sanders. So the reason why this matters is because this goes to the heart of the public perception of the Democrats, because their existing leaders are just railing against oligarchs. And their existing leaders are promoting bigger government. And that's sort of the rub here, because that's their program. That's how they're perceived. So even though they spend their time going against Trump on a nonstop basis. Their problem, of course, is that they don't have an alternative that appeals to voters. Their alternative, apparently for now, at least what you see on TV, is AOC and Bernie Sanders. Will Bernie run again? Probably not. Look, I'm amazed that guy has all the energy he does, private jet or otherwise. If you've ever worked going across country back and forth, it's a difficult gig, not easy by any stretch, but he's got the energy. I don't think he'll run again, but I also think he's setting up AOC. After all, he's not bringing anyone else out on tour. And that's our segment for this first segment on the Democrat oligarchy. Now we're going to have a special guest, Thomas McKenna, because there was a fairly big item. I mean, think about it. How many popes have been in your lifetime? And who the next pope matters? And that's what we're going to talk about next on Politics in Perspective. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I'm excited about this next segment. The whole world this week was watching and excited with the election of a new pope. There's a lot of questions out there now. What's the direction that this particular pope will take? I love the fact there he is on the balcony. I love right after his first appearance. I love the fact that the world is so interested at this moment in time. I would love them to be continually interested in this. And so I'm very pleased today to bring a friend of mine on who is a really good man and a really good Catholic, Thomas McKenna. We've been friends over the years. I can't remember how long and where we initially met. He is the founder and president of Catholic Action for Faith and Family and the executive director of the Confraternity of Catholic Clergy, a national association of priests and deacons. And he is a theologian, and one of his books is right there, right in front of us, Thomas. I want to start out by asking you a little bit about what you do and tell people about your books. But first, welcome to Politics in Perspective.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's great to be on your show.
All right, the first couple of minutes here, tell people about what Catholic Action for Faith and Family is, the confraternity, and please talk about your book.
Well, my whole life I've been involved in working with Catholic lay apostolate organizations. That's what I've done. This is not like a hobby or something. So over 45 years, I've worked serving the church as a layman. I do work with clergy, I work with bishops, I work with cardinals, but it's more as a layman trying to promote, uphold, and defend the values of Christianity through the Catholic faith. I founded Catholic Action for Faith and Family in 2006. And together with Cardinal Raymond Burke, who's now a cardinal. At that time, he was Archbishop of St. Louis, and Archbishop Cordileone of San Francisco. They're both two very close friends of mine and collaborators over the years. And so we put on everything from conferences to addressing issues, kind of a lot of times the social teachings of the church. A lot of people don't realize that the United States is roughly a quarter Catholic as far as religion. It's the largest Catholic denomination, Christian denomination in the country by far, and it's the largest voting bloc. So in the last 60 years, for example, whichever way the Catholics voted on a national, let's say, elections, that candidate won because of the issue. So many times Catholics don't know their faith, or they do, but they don't follow through with it. And so a lot of what I do in lectures, publishing books, articles, is reaching out to Catholics to help them to understand, you're a Catholic. This is what a question like abortion. That's why abortion is such an important issue. The Catholic Church, this is not uncompromising. So if we can work to get people to understand their faith better and then act their faith out in the social sphere, we feel that we can, make our country a better place. So that's kind of in a nutshell why I named it Catholic Action for Faith and Family. But we are a lay organization. We're not affiliated with the church. We're not for profit. And independently, all of our endeavors are funded by private individuals and organizations.
And what does the confraternity do, real quick?
The Confraternity of Catholic Clergy, actually, I'm the only non-clergy involved in it. They started back in the 70s, 1975, when, for those that are my age or maybe older would recall, there was a lot of confusion after the 60s. We had the Vatican Council, and a whole wave in society, but also in the church, came about in this idea we have to change the church and we have to renovate the church, and a lot of vocations, the religious were like, okay, why am I a religious then? And by the tens of thousands, nuns left the convents, went back, got married, priests were leaving the priesthood because there was a big confusion. And this group of priests here in the United States, a group that I knew the founders, they said, what's happening? They looked around and they said, my brother priest, they're leaving the priesthood. So they started this organization that would come together once a year for a 5-day conference to talk to each other, to have lectures about what is the priesthood, that we are not just secular people. We are, we give up our life for the church. We are other Christs. And I got involved with them. I was invited to attend once because I was involved in Catholic things. And when I saw the good that it did for these priests, and many of them said, I'm still in the priesthood because of this conference. I come together and with people, priests of like mind, it's helped my priesthood. So I started helping them. That was in 1993. And I just started helping put on their conferences. And at a certain point, they said, would you be our executive director? Because they are priests and they have, responsibilities. And organizational skills was not one of them. And not that I'm the greatest, but I was able to organize and make these things happen. And so they asked me to be the executive director. So they come together on a yearly basis and have meetings. In some of the groups in different dioceses come together for fraternal camaraderie, if you want, to help them understand and preserve their priesthood.
Okay, that sounds amazing. So, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is because I think you are in touch with the pulse of Catholicism at the clerical level within the United States, and of course, their views are impactful and had obvious impact in the choice of this particular pope. You're also a Catholic historian. You wrote the book, The Fatima Century, how the Pilgrim Virgin is changing our generation. Real quick, what was the point of that book, and where can people get it?
Well, the Fatima, most Catholics probably have heard of it. Catholic, just in a nutshell, we believe as Catholics that our Blessed Mother appeared in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, and to 3 little children, and had some messages to give, which she talked about. The First World War was carrying on. The war would come to an end if mankind did not change and turn back to God. A second World War would come that would be worse than the first. She talked about Russia spreading her errors, which nobody understood at the time because it was right before the Bolshevik Revolution, which then we knew after was communism, which became a scourge. So that was kind of the message, and what she came asking, saying, God is not pleased with the world. He wants, make reparation, come back to the faith, pray the rosary, things like that. So that was in 1917. And she said, if the world didn't change, these things would take place, and they did. And so whenever the world, I see things, the absurd now with things back in 1917. Women all wore, dresses and long sleeves. And I mean, you can't even compare it to today. But yet she said souls are going to hell by the, millions. because of the unfaithfulness to the morality and the faith. So that's always was a guiding light. My parents, we grew up praying the rosary every night after dinner. It didn't matter who was over; that was part of it. And grew up playing Fatima. And Fatima is really what got me into working with the faith. It's, the message said, I always, as a teenager, I wasn't a Mr. Religious guy. We had a ranch, a farm. I had horses and hunting dogs, and I had a great childhood growing up out on the ranch here in California. But I always had the idea, so if I believe this message that or God wants to change the world, who am I? What am I going to do about it? Just hear about it. So that's a long story, and it tells more about it in the book. There was I got involved with Catholic, and that's what I've done my whole life. And the Fatima message, especially that statue that I talk about in the book, it's the first statue, the original one that had miracles attributed to it. I have traveled for over 40 years all over the world with them as a special custodian, and I've had things like been flying intercontinental flights, and when the pilot or crew find out this is the famous statue, they move us to first class, and meeting all kinds of special people, and that's what I shared in the book. There was a lot of these stories that I saw change people's life that I witnessed, and I wanted to share those inspiring stories with people.
That's incredible, and you, of course, get that his books on Amazon. Okay, so this past week, or actually longer, since Easter, the world has been focused on Vatican City. For those of you who have never visited, you've seen pictures undoubtedly. It is majestic in not the monarch, not as a monarch, but just the majesty of it, the beauty of it, the solemnness of it. So many levels when you go there. It's incredibly touching. But of course, it's not just architecture. I hope everyone sees St. Peter's once in their life. But the bigger issue, of course, is the church, its message, its purpose, and of course, this week, the papacy. I did an interview this past week with regard to why does it matter? Why does the papacy matter? Uh, I'd like to ask you that question. Let's start off with that. Why does this matter so much? Not and and not so much to the church, if you mind me saying that, but to the world. Why does this matter to the world?
Well, I think there's multiple layers of this. First of all, as a Christian, as a Catholic believer, we believe that the Holy Father is the successor of God's church on earth. He's the successor of Christ. When Christ rose from the dead, he left St. Peter. And so this person this is Christ's church on earth. And the head of 1,400,000,000 and roughly 80,000,000 people, an enormous responsibility. But the whole world, because I believe even though people say, well, they don't believe, Catholicism, or they don't follow that, or the Pope, deep down, because of the respect and because of the integrity, I would say, of the Catholic Church, everyone respects the authority of the Church as a moral authority. And I think the Pope would be someone who is the head of that. Yesterday it was interesting when that 1 hour they announced that the white smoke came out, and there's a Pope, and then there was everybody waiting. Well, waiting for the Pope to come out to see who it was. I flicked through every channel on our television. I stopped because there's a lot of channels. Every channel was watching the papacy. They had stopped all the shows, whether it's CNN, Fox News, all the local channels, everyone stopped to watch it. And I think it's because it's the integrity and the moral authority that the church, leaves. Even I have many Jewish friends who were calling me wanting to know, who do I think the Pope would be? Who would it be? What's coming? Like, even for people, who don't believe in our Christian values, they were very interested in who was going to be the Pope, and are you happy with the Pope, and asking all kinds of questions. So that was very interesting. And I think that's why, because he is God's representative of His faithful on earth, and that's an awesome responsibility.
Yeah, I I was with a reporter for a certain major news channel on a plane talking to him about this, and there really is no thing like this on Earth. There never has been, right? And so the world's attention was on the church this week and who this would be, not this week, just for the last month, and that guiding light that they want to see, regardless of who it is. As you mentioned, if you're of the Jewish faith, for which I have an enormous amount of respect, or if you're a Protestant or otherwise, they still want to see that moral leader. And there's just no example like that in all of history. This is, after all, the world's longest running institution, nearly 2,000 year line and 267. So let's talk about number 267. I did not have him on my short list. I blame myself for that because I'm in politics. That's how you and I first met. I've always talked about the fact that name ID matters in politics to the electors. Do people know who you are? If they're strangers to you, it's going to get hard for them to vote for you. And here we have this particular cardinal who probably had a closer relationship with some of the other cardinals than many of us focused upon. So, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I'm kind of like you, Tom. He was not on my radar, probably because although I do know, the other cardinal, I was surprised that, but he was never, when he was a missionary down in Peru for many years, and then he was the head of the Augustinian order, and he was based in Rome. So he never, as a bishop, was in the United States. So when he was made a bishop, he was down in Peru. Then he was brought to Rome to be in charge of the congregation, or now the dicastery for naming, bishops. And he was made a cardinal in Rome. So he never had a function in the United States. He never had a diocese here. He never was part of our bishops' conference here. So I think that's part of the reason he didn't have much of a history here. So he was under a lot of people's, radar. He was not outspoken. He was not a known figure like we have some of the other cardinals are. That being said, he is a quite good educated man. He has a degree in theology from a university in Rome, the Angelicum. He has a doctorate in canon law. The fact that he was the superior of the order for a number of years of the Augustinian order. He's a religious. He's an Augustinian, which is another reason he was not a diocesan priest. He was never assigned to a diocese. He was a part of an order. So, I don't know him. I've never met him. I think what I see is what I've read about him, and I think that's why he was under a surprise for a lot of people, especially Americans, because he was not known very well, and he is the first American, which was another surprising factor. There never was an American pope in history, so he's the first American pope, which is quite interesting, also.
So, the next question is, there's a famous saying, "What's in a name?" And he is Pope Leo the 14th. And if you look back at the history of popes, historically, the choice of a name has symbolism to it, if not more. And so he picks Leo the 14th. Leo the 13th was a pretty dynamic figure in church history. And during his pontificate, it was, for me as a historian, a very significant period. World industrialization was underway. The governments were changing. The way the economics were changing. We were migrating from the farm and the stability of the family to the urban centers, which over time tends to lead to the breakdown of the family. And that particular pope had a lot to say about that. So, what's in a name? What's your thoughts on his choice of a name?
Well, I mean, I think myself and I've talked to some colleagues about that. The fact that he chose a name Leo, the 14th, not something, is something that represents stability, if you want. He wasn't trying, like Pope Francis was Francis the First, and people, were saying, is the new Pope, is he going to be like so much in the line of Pope Francis, he's going to be Francis II. Like we have to renovate, we have to be new. For this Pope to go back and say, I want to be in a line of Leo by taking that title, represents, from what we, if you want, what we can discern a little bit, was that he wanted to stay more in the tradition of the church. Another aspect that, for a lot of those people like myself who love the traditions of the church and the aspects of what that brings to us, is the fact that the Pope came out wearing the traditional garb of the church. Dressed not just as Pope Francis came out dressed just in a white cassock, with the attitude, the idea that, well, I'm not up to all that. I just want to be a simple man. I think this Pope coming out, and if you want, acting more papal, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, because when he becomes the Pope, it's not about him anymore. It's not the honors that he has, to come out on the balcony, to have hundreds of thousands, the whole world looking. It's not because of who he was, the cardinal from the United States. It's because of what he represents. And I think this Pope had an understanding, a better understanding of that this is my role. Maybe he's humiliated. He says, no, this is not me, but he knows that's what he has to do. And I think taking that name, coming out in the traditions, and giving a very homily, a little word based in the gospel, I think was a very positive for many Catholics who are longing to see that this is the role of a pope. He's not a CEO. He wasn't chosen. He's not being paid. He was elected by something very spiritual. And the moment when he's elected, they go to him and say, "Do you accept to be pope?" The moment he says yes, he just went from being a common, a man, let's say a cardinal, with graduation. That moment he accepts it, he now becomes the God's representative of his holy faith on this earth. That's beyond imagination, and that's why he's a special person. He could be an illiterate. He could be someone who's not intelligent. But if he is the Holy Father, he is seen by Christians the world over as God's representative, and that's something very special. And I hope that this Pope, it seems, has some understanding of that. It's something so awesome. I don't know if you ever can really comprehend it, but I was
Yeah, no,
very pleased.
I wouldn't think so. There was the movie Elizabeth, and I'm remembering a scene when she becomes the queen. Her top minister asks to see certain elements related to her as a person, and her lady in waiting says, "Why is that?" And the line that he says is, "She's now Queen of England. Her body no longer belongs to her, it belongs to the state." I'm sure you remember that
Yes.
scene. So, what is extraordinarily different than a president who can retire and go back to a level of anonymity if they choose, right? Um, Most popes live out their term, but they are, I mean, there is no element of life that'll ever be normal again. Now, look, I love the fact about him my family's from Chicago. That you see all these things popping up about, there's one hot dog stand that he frequented, and they put up a thing in Latin saying he has eaten here. I I love the fact that we can relate to him to some degree, but it's funny you mentioned, when they ask him, "Do you accept this?" Okay, this is, there's no way to comprehend that moment. There in history, of course, there's been, the Borgias who the Borgia Pope who wanted to be Pope, right? Julius II, who fiercely wanted to be Pope, but they had more temporal desires. Today, to sit there and put that weight on your shoulders is truly amazing. So before we get to where he's going, Pope Francis, we've talked about him a little bit. He was consequential. And what, to me, that I'm using it in the definition is that there were consequences to what he did and why. Um, my understanding is that you're not the biggest Pope Francis fan in the whole world. So, what is it that gave you concern about his pontificate?
Well, the as much as what we've all spoken about the reverence and the importance of a pope, the pope is not the church. He is the guardian, if you want, of our Lord's church, the institution that our Lord Jesus Christ founded. So if we as Catholics talk about questions, there are customs, things we do, the way we have mass, the way things are done. But then there are the doctrinal, what we call questions of faith and morals. Those are things that were instituted by Christ and can never be changed. No pope can declare abortion is now okay, or something that is a doctrinal issue. And the popes therefore have, is normally would, guide the church. They would be open to listen, then they would make changes or improve, work through it. But one of the things that that I and many others found was problematic was that Pope Francis, kind of had his way of doing things or his ideas, and he did those by mandate. So, for example, as we have in the president here in the United States, he can issue executive orders, like just I can change something, or I can order something, or I can make a law, so I'm going to do it. That's not the normal way. For certain circumstances, occasionally that exists for that. But as a rule, it's something that's discussed in the House and the Senate and signed by the president. There's kind of an understanding. Well, the same in the church. The Pope, he is autonomous. He is like the king. He is the last word on canon law. He's above the law, the canon law, if you want, in the sense that, he can change something. But is it right or wrong? And so in the church, we have something, if you want, would be equivalent to executive order, which is called a motu proprio, Pope rule, that the Pope says, this is going to be done because I want it done, whether anyone agrees or doesn't agree. And this Pope ran the church a lot like that. He issued more motu proprio, like 3 times or 4 times the amount that the last 2 popes, Pope John Paul, who reigned for 26 years, and Pope Benedict, who I think was 6 or 7 years. This Pope Francis, issued so many more motu proprios, and that was one of the problems people said, is that he wasn't. He talked about listening and had synods, but a lot of people felt he wasn't listening to their side of things and their perspective, and so that was. I think that I would agree with that he did not listened. He had a certain idea. This is how I want it, and didn't listen to the universal church.
There's also the issue of sort of he spoke and created more questions related to doctrine than he clarified. Can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah, that's probably the hallmark, if you want, and that is, and it comes down to what myself and others was the church on questions of faith and morals has to be clear. There is no and ambiguity. So, for example, the great Saint Pius X, who lived in last century and wrote an encyclical. He's a saint on what he called modernism, which was a corruption of the church. And one of the characteristics that he said was terrible was ambiguity. And I would say Pope Francis on many issues was ambiguous, and I can say that because, for example, the Catholic Church does not recognize in any way a same-sex marriage. It's not a marriage. In fact, many people are very confused. If I go to someone's wedding who, they're not Catholic, I can go to a Jewish wedding. I don't participate, or I go to a Protestant. For a Catholic to go to a same-sex marriage is sinful. You cannot do that, because by going, if you're endorsing, like giving that you think this is, you're going, it's my niece or my nephew or my friend, by attending it, you're saying this is a marriage, and it's the Catholic Church says this is not. This is a marriage. So the Pope was very confused on that, and led confusion, where this whole question that a document that came out some months ago saying you can bless same-sex couples, but you're not blessing them as a couple, you're blessing them. Well, that what the translated for the common person was, you're blessing it. And the German Conference of Bishops, which is very liberal, they just 2 weeks ago came out with a new guideline of how to give a blessing. Like, it's actually a formula now for same-sex couples or couples that are in irregular, relationships, that because they have love, and we have to look at the good aspects of them. The church is never condemning people, but the church has to reach where they are and say, this is wrong. You're living in sin, or this is not a marriage, and homosexuality is condemned. We'll help you. We'll work with you. And that was very confusing. A lot of those issues with Pope Francis. Who am I to judge? That's kind of like early on in his pontificate. That was a phrase he said, and that was been used far and wide. And many people in those type of lifestyles will defend their position, saying the Holy Father, Pope Francis, said this is okay, and it's not okay. And I think that is a terrible confusion that the new Pope is going to have to address these issues and clarify these points that were not clarified before.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I just briefly want to say on that subject, throughout history, many times, the cause of modernity has been brought up, saying that the church must modernize to fit the times. And I have publicly said, if the church did that every single time that had been asked in the last 2,000 years, it wouldn't be the church. You mentioned one from over a century ago during the time of the Renaissance in Italy. There were similar cries, "Oh, just ease up on a particular issue." The church is more like a lighthouse than it is a boat, and you don't change a lighthouse in a storm. You keep it there, and in times like this, you can make the argument of a storm. All right. We just have a few minutes left, but perhaps the most important few minutes for our viewers. I know it's speculation, and I think we should give this man a chance, because the office changes people. That has always been true in history, whether it's a mayor, a president, or the Pope. Can you give us some clues on where will Leo go? What should conservatives think about him? What lies ahead? I know that's hard, but everybody's asking that.
Well, I think we have to see some good signs are that he's been in his address initially yesterday, and then this morning he had a mass with all the cardinals, mass of Thanksgiving for that he was named Pope, and his homily was very based in the Gospels. I haven't not heard it yet, but I heard reference. It was good. I think we need to see what he's moving ahead, how he addresses some of these issues that need to be clarified. For example, transgenderism. I've heard that he's consistently been opposed to, and transgenderism, LGBT, the pro-abortion movement. What is he going to make statements about? And see, so far, like I said, we only know him for a day. There were many positive signs. The way he spoke, the way he dressed. I think what we can
The fact that his first mass was in Latin.
was in Latin. The other thing I think is positive is that he is an educated man in the sense that he has a degree in canon law, doctorate. He has a degree in theology. So he's someone. Pope Francis did not have a degree in theology. Did not have a degree in canon. He didn't have. So I think he understanding the church better, the laws of the church. We can hope that that's going to influence him in how he does things, that he's not going to just be issuing motu proprios like, I'm going to do it this way, that he would follow the rules of the church. The other thing that I've been told by some people, cardinals that know him, that he's a very approachable person, which I think his demeanor when he came out yesterday and seeing him interacting, that's one thing I have heard, that he's very approachable, that he's a kind person. I think that will go a long way to at least allowing him to hear from people. If a lot of people were intimidated, to speak with Pope Francis, or he wouldn't allow. I know some cardinals that had asked to speak with him about issues and were never given an audience, and I think that's a problem because cardinals are the advisors of the Pope, and so I think moving ahead, we should look to that and see how this Pope. What does he say? It's going to take time. This is a whole new office, and also I think we can see, does he replace some of the people around him? Is he going to keep the Secretary of State or put someone else of his own? The head of a dicastery of Pope Francis got there and brought in Pope Cardinal Fernandez, who he made a cardinal, and he's an Argentinian and wrote his documents. That's something that it's going to take time to see, what does this new Pope, what changes does he make? And I think that'll tell us a lot.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the fact that he, to me, and we need to close here, but the Catholic religion is exceptionally intellectual. And what I mean by that was there has been a long series of leaders, popes, theologians who have thought these things through and have buttressed the thought of the church. This isn't something that should be sway one side to the other like a pendulum swing, like you see in American politics. That's not the role of the church. It is not accidental that Christ said, on this rock. He did not say on these shifting sands or otherwise. And so for me, just like you, the idea that he came out and made these initial genuflections, if you will, to tradition, perhaps that is saying that I understand the importance of the traditions of the church, the guidelines that have been set out over the centuries. And I hope listeners and people around the world will give this man a chance. I'm sure, I disagreed with Francis, you disagreed with Francis, but the greater role is the faith, the church, and Christ's meaning for us all. And I am hopeful, as many are, that this new Pope will reinvigorate that in all of us. Thomas, I want to thank you for your spending time today. I'm sure we'll talk again about this subject because I think obviously it's so important and so many people were paying attention. And I want to thank our listeners for listening in. This is the longest interview segment we had, and for good reason. So thanks for watching Politics in Perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that segment. This is the third segment for the show this week, and we're going to cover the Trump has a deal, a trade deal specifically. As you know, over the last week, or actually since he started the whole campaign related to tariffs, he has been negotiating with countries. England is the first to reach the framework for a deal. About a month ago, I was on, I believe, Times Radio in London saying to the presenter there that, in fact, England had a lot to offer the United States when it came to a trade deal, not just because of its historic relationship with the United States, but that it should be the easiest to make and it would be a framework going forward for all other countries. I said that maybe a month, 6 weeks ago. That, of course, is what President Trump said the other day as we look at some of these, two of the pictures from the meeting. On the left is the Trump people along with the ambassador. Over Trump's left shoulder, right to the screen, you see the ambassador to England. So what does this trade deal do? Well, we didn't actually see the paperwork on it. Oh, sorry, on the right, I forgot to mention that, of course, there is the British Prime Minister who was on the phone. They had this sort of transatlantic uh, press conference. And the British Prime Minister was pretty stoked about this, as was the ambassador to the United States from England. So this deal covers what? It grants a greater access to American producers to the British market. England, of course, had tariffs, as do most of Europe, or prohibited the sale of certain items. And so there's greater access for things like American beef, which will be a big issue in the discussions with Australia, corn products like ethanol, dairy, and energy, American energy, which is a good thing for England because it makes it more stable and energy self-sufficient in the sense that it doesn't have to look towards the rest of Europe or especially Russia. So it also lowers tariffs for cars on both sides of the Atlantic, and it zeroes out tariffs on British steel because the United States needs a steady flow of steel. Both countries do, quite honestly, for national security. Let's listen to President Trump about this particular deal.
Both countries have agreed that the economic security is national security and will be working together as allies to ensure that we have a strong industrial base, appropriate export controls and protections for key technologies and industries like steel. Steel is a big factor. Both countries will become stronger with steel and things necessary for military. You know, we used to build ships and other things literally at a level that nobody's ever seen, and we haven't, we've eased up, and I would say that the UK certainly eased up, but now we're going to be uneasing both, and we work together.
Well, there you go. I like the fact that right out of the gate, he ties economic security to national security, which of course makes sense. We live in a world of China being an industrial empire, Russia a failing industrial empire. China is failing too, but China builds ships every day. They build coal factories every day. So, if you look at history, and I certainly cover this in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, the trajectory of an economic power, their ability to project power is based on their economic power and economic security. So, the United States, which has weakened itself, has put itself in a position not to be able to project power. You can argue whether some on the left think that's a good idea. Russia was able to project power while its economy was improving decades ago, but once it started failing, also decades ago, it was limited in that. And now you see in this war in Ukraine just how limited their power is because they expected to run over Ukraine quite quickly. And here we are so many years later on. China is running into economic difficulty. So what a major aspect of what Trump is doing is securing the economy in the American homeland so that it is secure from a foreign policy point of view. You can't argue with that. Now, is it perfect free trade? Clearly not, because there are still some tariffs between the two, and they have promised to continue to work on those things. But it is a better deal than it exists today. And that's the key item here. Now, of course, those on the left, they panned it. MSNBC, those kind of groups, they didn't like the deal. They said it was a desperate attempt by President Trump because he needs a success. Okay, well, does anybody think President Trump could give away the winning lottery numbers? And if he didn't do it in time for MSNBC's nightly news, they would complain about that. So I'm not particularly concerned about the complaints on the left, because if this sets off a series of trade deals, the economy will lift, and that will be a success for the country, which means it's not a success for MSNBC, or it won't be for their politicians. But let's look at also the way business looked at it. Now, look, the stock market didn't jump as much as some of us thought it would. It is, of course, higher than it was on Liberation Day about 5 weeks ago, but it is still improving week to week. And as these trade deals come in, it will. The next tripwire will be the tax bill, which we're going to cover again in next week's show. But overall, this is a start of a process. Next up is China. So let's listen to President Trump when it comes to the China trade talks.
Scott's going to be going to Switzerland, meeting with China, and they very much want to make a deal. We can all play games. Who made the first call? Who didn't make the? It doesn't matter. It only matters what happens in that room. But I will tell you that China very much wants to make a deal. We'll see how that works out. Every country throughout the last 40, 50 years has literally ripped off the United States on trade, on military, on protection, on all the different things. And we are now making fair deals.
So let's talk about that. First of all, of course, he was talking about Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent going overseas to Switzerland. It is the start of the talks. I like the tonality of it. Doesn't really matter who picked up the phone call. What matters is the result. Reagan used to say you can get a lot done if you don't worry about who gets the credit. Well, so they've started this process. We talked last week on Politics in Perspective with Simone Gao about the trouble that China is in economically and why they're doing things they are. We had Gordon Chang on Politics in Perspective a couple of months ago saying the same sort of thing. The reality is that they are in a world of economic hurt with the Trump tariffs. So what Trump has done is maximized his leverage, and now they're in a position to start to talk. Now, this is going to be a process for China, because it isn't just about what the trade deal will be. It's not just about the foreign policy, but it is also a problem for China, because China's now got to go back after these talks, and they always, Xi Jinping and the rest always have to be able to go back and say, we're better than the United States. They have to save face, but they don't call it save face there. What they say is, of course, that they got the better of the United States, and they're going to do that and have to do that. So this is a process. But at the end of the day, the process has to start somewhere. If you're going to climb up the mountain, you've got to start somewhere. And China is the trade mountain, because China really has been ripping us off in the sense that we have been foolish enough to grant them a better trade deal than anyone else. And that's just not good, because as China got rich, what was it doing? It was planning, building warships, talking about taking over Taiwan, putting its entities that are either owned by the state or closely allied with them, putting them in places like the Panama Canal or on the coast of Africa or other places, right? There's even talk of them in the Caribbean islands. So this resets the table, and you're going to see a retrenchment. I actually did an interview this past week. Let me take a quick sip of water here. And talked about the fact that probably 15 to 20 years from now, It's not China that's going to be this largest competitor to the United States economically. It is going to be India, because the Chinese population is falling. The experts say it's probably going to be 20 years before that problem could even be realistically addressed, because their one-child policy gutted the 2 or 3 generations. So India, on the other hand, is growing the fastest population-wise. Population growth equals economic growth. Population decline equals economics decline, all other things being equal. So as Trump has maximum leverage with them, Gordon Chang points out that we shouldn't let him off the hook. But it is true that the United States, it should be trading with the world, and it's not going to give up on trade with China. As we end this segment, I just want to say that in history, the biggest traders, traders, have been Greece, Rome, Spain, England, Holland, Portugal, going back years, and across the United States. They have been the richest countries. And in being the richest country, you have the highest standard of living. The United States is the world's biggest market. It can dictate some of these terms right now, and they should. This is the time to do it. No, you're not going to trust a Democrat in the future to do it. Trump's on the reason why Trump's doing it now, he's not running for anything again, so he has a little bit of leeway there. But I like the fact that he's tying it to national security, because we do need to build steel here. We do need drugs here. By the way, I'm an advocate of a strategic reserve of essential drugs. And I like the fact that it's not just about America first, but it is making sure that America can take care of itself when trouble lies ahead. All right. That's our show for this week. I hope you liked all of it. You can catch this, and there's a link to all of my shows on politicalvanguard.com. This show will be up there by the time you see it as well. And so thanks to our sponsors, Patriot.tv and AUN TV, for showing it. And see you on YouTube and Rumble. Please share it with your friends, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.